Hi everyone, this is Nathan. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and Archaeologist for the Stockbridge-Munsee community. I was asked if I wanted to come up with a short video for this summer's language camp related to the work that I do in historic preservation. So I thought that y'all might be interested in learning a little bit about flint knapping, essentially the basics of flint knapping, what it is, some of the tools and resources used to flint knap, along with some of the techniques that flint knappers use to make stone tools. So what is flint knapping? Flint knapping is a traditional form of stone tool making or lithic technology. Lithic technologies have been practiced for thousands of years by cultures all across the world. It's still practiced by some peoples today and enjoyed by hobbyists. Flint knapping involves making stone tools from fracturing stones like chert or flint or obsidian that can easily be shaped or knapped, hence its name, into various tools. Tools like projectile points for spears, atlatls, arrows, blades, hand axes, or simple scrapers made from flakes, and even gun flints for firearms like muskets. All of these use lithic technology and were all part of daily life for the majority of humankind's existence. So in the field of archaeology, stone tools are the materials left behind from their production. They're often the one thing that's come across on pre-contact sites. In fact, they are typically some of the only materials that last, showing that people were once in that exact spot hundreds or thousands of years ago. So that's really powerful and says a lot about the technology, because most modern manufacturing objects will never last that long. So in my work in helping protect and preserve cultural resources and archaeological sites, I'm often working with these artifacts. So as an archaeologist, it's helpful to understand flint knapping because it can inform us about how past peoples were using lithic technologies in their daily life, from the different types of tools being made and used to how people were using their social networks and interacting with the natural world around them. So more importantly, lithic technology and the stages of the development over thousands of years, that can be dated. So dating the tools can help archaeologists and those working in historic preservation understand how old a particular site is, or further what people were doing at that site. Okay, so let's get into the tools used in flint knapping, and essentially we can break them down into two categories. We'll start with the modern and then we'll move to the more traditional. Both of these categories of tools, they're still used today widely in flint knapping. It just really depends on your preference or the type of project that you're working on and what you like to use. So let's get into it here. So for modern, these are just two examples, but essentially there are many variations, but they do the same exact function. We'll start with this. This is called a copper bopper. It's pretty heavy, and you're going to be using a copper bopper when you are doing kind of the first stage of reduction. So you'd use this to whack off large pieces of flint from the stone in order to start creating a biface and then later some kind of projectile point. So you would start with that, and then when you're refining and trying to get to do some more fine work, you're going to start using this. This is a pressure flaker. It's just a copper nail, and it's embedded into a dowel rod just to give you some leverage when you're flaking smaller pieces of the stone material off of a biface and doing that intricate work when you're kind of finishing a projectile point. The thing that's really nice about something like this is that copper is very durable, and in flint knapping, your materials will get worn down because you're constantly, pressing and rubbing them against the stone, so you can resharpen the tip of this copper nail over and over again. So that's essentially the modern tools that are going to be used by flint knappers. So let's look at some of these traditional ones, and we'll start with kind of the equivalent to the copper bopper, which come in two forms. You'll have a hammerstone, and you'll see different type sizes on these, but essentially it's going to be just a hard, smooth, dense stone that you can hold with your hand, and you're going to be lopping off large sections of stone material from the project that you're working on, and size is dictated by the project. So you can have larger stones for big work that you're doing, and then you can come down to a smaller, smooth stone that you can hold and work on more finer, precise work. This again is I guess equivalent to the copper bopper. It's called a billet. This one is made out of elk antler, and essentially the same thing. You're just going to be kind of lopping off pieces of the material that you're working on to try to refine it down to a more usable working piece. And then we'll get to the equivalent to the pressure flaker, and it is the antler tine, an antler pressure flaker. They can be cut down into different sizes. As you can see, I got antlers here that I have for some of the work that I'm doing when I need a new antler tine for a pressure flaker. And you can cut this as long as you want. Obviously, the longer the pressure flaker, the more leverage that it's going to get you. And you can literally just cut it right here with a hacksaw and take it off. And we'll go back and look at this billet, but a billet is typically made from the base of the antler here. It's the most dense part of the antler. So you would obviously cut this down and grind it off and smooth it down, and you have your billet. The thing with materials like these, like an organic material, is that the soils in the Northeast here are typically acidic, and preservation for things like this isn't very good. So often on an archaeological site, the only thing that you might find is a hammerstone like this. Typically, organic materials like this will decay, and you don't typically find them in some settings. Okay, so let's start looking at the different materials that were being used in flint knapping and still are used in flint knapping. Essentially, flint knappers use conchoidal fracturing stone like chert or flint or obsidian. Basically, these principles just make it easy to break and shape into the different tools that you're going to be using. So here you have what is called naveculate. Naveculate is from the southeast, specifically Arkansas. I used to work in archaeology down in the southeast, out in Nashville, Tennessee, and in over by Arkansas you'd find a lot of this. It's typically white in color like that. In the Tennessee region, in the Cumberland, Middle Tennessee, you'll have what is called Fort Payne. It's a chert. It comes in this kind of grayish brown kind of color, and you'll see this is what you'll find it like. There'll be cobbles of this kind of in stream beds or eroding out of the side of different land formations. But you can see once you break it down, and you might break this with like a hammerstone, and it'll break apart like this. Lastly, just as an example, this is obsidian. Obsidian is a volcanic glass. You'll find this a lot out in the Southwest and Western United States. Essentially, obsidian is produced by the pressures and heat inside the earth, and then comes out. So I just want to turn to resources here in the northeastern area, specifically in New York, where the Tribal Historic Preservation Office is quartered in Troy. Two of the types that we often find associated with archaeological sites is Onondaga chert and Norman's Kill chert. They're just two available resources here in the area, and can tell us a lot about where peoples in the past were kind of extracting resources for their tool making. And I think this brings up an important point in terms of trade networks and the distances that past peoples were traveling. For example, in a recent consultation project I've been working on associated with the Mohican site along the Otter Creek in Addison County, Vermont, the site demonstrates how understanding lithic materials like these cherts can help archaeologists understand past peoples, because the artifacts found at this site were made of stone from sources in the mountains nearby, from farther away in New York and Maine, but also as far away as northern Labrador in Canada, which is pretty amazing. The site has multiple phases of occupation that go back up to 7,000 years. So it just really demonstrates, the value of these different resources for people in the past in making tools that help them survive. And like I said, these clues help archaeologists map the ancient social networks that connected Native communities across the northeastern United States. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start with the copper bopper. And I'm just going to start taking some flakes off of this. So you want to hold it firmly with your hand, and we're just going to come straight down with the bopper and try to drive some of these flakes off on the bottom. As you can see, this is the type of flake you're going to be taking off, and you're just going to keep on doing that and whittling off. If you can get a big piece, let's see if we can get a big piece here. This could be the start of maybe a scraper. For a little bit bigger, you could go and potentially make a projectile point like an arrowhead out of it. We'll go and we'll try with the antler billet as well. Again, you can see the type of flakes that are going to be coming off of there. All right, let's try pressure flaking this flake that we drove off of that Naveculite. So we'll start with the modern pressure flaker. And when you're pressure flaking, you want to just start at one side and work your way all along that edge. You're just going to be applying pressure to flake off the edge. And then once you're done with the one side, you'll flip it over and go all the way back. This time I use the antler tine. And if you look close, I don't know if you can see, but you'll have a serrated, worked edge on both sides that's very sharp. And with that, you've just created a tool that can be utilized for scraping and cutting. And that's essentially how you use the pressure flaker. Well, thanks for watching today. I hope you feel like you've learned a little bit about the basics of flint knapping and how it relates to what I do in historic preservation and as an archaeologist. You know, flint knapping was a way of life for past people. It's something that they did every day that helped them survive. If you like this though, you know, with a lot of practice, someday you might be able to make something like this, a projectile point, an arrowhead that would have been used. So have a good day out there, and we'll see you next time.